Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi, watching the morning sun rise over Pearl Harbor. It's December 7th, 1941, and below him the most successful naval airstrike in history is unfolding. American battleships burn in the harbor. American aircraft lie destroyed on their airfields. The Pacific Fleet that was supposed to defend the American West Coast is crippled, helpless, defeated. But Nagumo isn't celebrating. He's reading a radio intercept from his intelligence officer, a message that arrived 30 minutes after the attack began. The message is brief, coded, routine, just another communication in the endless stream of radio traffic that coordinates naval operations across the Pacific. Except this message wasn't sent by any Japanese unit. The transmission originated from a British station in Singapore. The content, when decoded, reveals detailed knowledge of Japanese fleet positions, aircraft numbers, attack vectors, knowledge that should be impossible for the British to possess, knowledge that suggests someone is reading Japanese naval codes in real time. Commander Minoru Genda, Nagumo's air operations officer, joins him on the bridge. Genda planned the Pearl Harbor attack, coordinated the training, selected the targets. He's brilliant, innovative, the finest tactical mind in the Imperial Navy, but he's also troubled by the same intelligence reports that concern Nagumo. "Admiral," Genda says quietly, "the British message traffic suggests they knew about our operation. Not the specific target, but the fleet movements, the timing, the scale. How is that possible? Our communication security is absolute." Nagumo studies the intercept again. The British message references Japanese carrier movements in the North Pacific, mentions unusual radio silence from the First Air Fleet, speculates about potential targets. The language is cautious, analytical, but the underlying knowledge is precise. "They're guessing," Nagumo says finally. "Intelligence analysis based on traffic patterns, movement reports, logical deduction. The British are skilled at this kind of work." But Genda isn't convinced. "Admiral, this isn't guesswork. The British message includes specific details about our force composition, our departure times, our communication procedures, details that suggest direct access to our operational planning." The conversation ends inconclusively. The attack on Pearl Harbor succeeds beyond Japanese expectations. American naval power in the Pacific is neutralized. The way is clear for Japanese expansion throughout Southeast Asia and the Central Pacific. But the British intercept plants a seed of doubt that will grow over the coming months. January 1942. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, reviews intelligence summaries at his headquarters in Hiroshima Bay. The reports detail Allied naval movements throughout the Pacific, compiled from radio intercepts, reconnaissance flights, submarine observations. The intelligence picture is comprehensive, detailed, reassuring. But buried in the routine reports is a pattern that troubles Yamamoto's staff. British and American naval units are avoiding Japanese submarine patrol areas with unusual precision. Allied convoys are taking routes that bypass Japanese reconnaissance zones. Allied fleet movements suggest advanced knowledge of Japanese dispositions. Captain Kameto Kuroshima, Yamamoto's chief of staff, brings the pattern to his attention. "Admiral, Allied naval operations demonstrate coordination that requires real-time intelligence sharing. The British are providing the Americans with information about our movements, our patrol areas, our operational plans." Yamamoto studies the charts showing Allied shipping routes, Japanese submarine positions, intercept attempts. The pattern is subtle but consistent. Allied vessels are avoiding Japanese forces with accuracy that suggests detailed knowledge of Japanese deployments. "How are the British obtaining this intelligence?" Yamamoto asks. Kuroshima has no answer. Japanese communication security is based on the most sophisticated cipher system in the world. The Type 97 cipher machine produces codes that Japanese cryptographers believe are mathematically unbreakable, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Suggests that British intelligence services have found ways to penetrate Japanese communications, to read Japanese naval codes, to provide Allied forces with real-time intelligence about Japanese operations. March 1942. The pattern becomes undeniable during the Indian Ocean raid. Nagumo's carrier force, the same units that attacked Pearl Harbor, strikes British naval bases at Colombo and Trincomalee. The attacks achieve tactical success, sinking British cruisers and destroying aircraft. But British forces evacuate key assets before the attacks begin. Admiral Sir James Somerville, commanding the British Eastern Fleet, withdraws his heavy units from Ceylon just hours before Japanese aircraft arrive. British intelligence warns merchant vessels to avoid specific sea areas where Japanese submarines are operating. British coastal defenses are reinforced exactly where Japanese reconnaissance indicates potential landing sites. The British are fighting with perfect situational awareness, while Japanese forces operate partially blind. Japanese intelligence estimates British fleet strength at 2 battleships, 1 carrier, 6 cruisers. British actual strength is 3 battleships, 3 carriers, 8 cruisers, plus numerous destroyers and submarines. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor airstrike, leads reconnaissance flights over Ceylon. His reports describe British defensive preparations that suggest advance warning of Japanese intentions, anti-aircraft positions sited to defend against specific approach routes, fighter aircraft positioned at forward airfields that provide optimal intercept capabilities. The British knew we were coming, Fuchida tells Nagumo after returning from the mission. Not just that we might attack Ceylon, but when, where, with what forces. Their defensive preparations are too precise, too well coordinated to be coincidental. Nagumo forwards Fuchida's observations to Combined Fleet Headquarters. Yamamoto reads the reports, studies the intelligence summaries, begins questioning fundamental assumptions about Japanese communications security. If the British can predict Japanese naval operations with such accuracy, they must have access to Japanese planning documents, Japanese operational orders, Japanese strategic intentions. April 1942. The Doolittle raid confirms Yamamoto's worst fears. 16 American bombers launched from the carrier Hornet strike targets in Japan itself. The attack causes minimal physical damage, but enormous psychological impact. The Japanese home islands, supposedly invulnerable to enemy attack, have been violated. But more disturbing than the attack itself is the intelligence failure that made it possible. Japanese naval patrols failed to detect the American task force approaching Japan. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft failed to locate the enemy carriers. Japanese intelligence services failed to predict the operation despite monitoring American naval communications for months. The American task force approached Japan along a route that avoided all Japanese patrol areas, bypassed all reconnaissance zones, evaded all defensive positions. As if American planners possessed detailed knowledge of Japanese defensive arrangements, Japanese patrol schedules, Japanese operational procedures. Yamamoto convenes a special intelligence conference at Combined Fleet Headquarters. Present are the senior intelligence officers from all major naval commands, the cryptographers responsible for Japanese communications security, the analysts who monitor Allied radio traffic. Gentlemen, Yamamoto begins, we face an intelligence crisis. Allied naval operations demonstrate advanced knowledge of our movements, our plans, our capabilities. Either our communications security has been compromised, or Allied intelligence capabilities exceed our estimates. Captain Tomioka, Chief of the Naval General Staff Intelligence Section, presents the official assessment. Admiral, our cipher systems are mathematically unbreakable. The Type 97 machine produces codes with complexity that exceeds Allied cryptographic capabilities. Our communications security is absolute. Then how do you explain Allied operational success? Yamamoto asks. How do you explain British and American naval units avoiding our forces with such precision? How do you explain defensive preparations that suggest advance warning of our operations? Tomioka has no satisfactory answer. Neither do the other intelligence officers. The evidence suggests communications compromise, but the mathematics of Japanese cipher systems make such compromise theoretically impossible. The conference ends inconclusively. Japanese intelligence services intensify monitoring of Allied communications, searching for evidence of how the British and Americans coordinate their operations. But they find nothing definitive, nothing that explains Allied tactical advantages. May 1942. Yamamoto decides to test Allied intelligence capabilities through deception. He plans Operation MI, the attack on Midway Island, using elaborate communications security measures designed to conceal Japanese intentions. Radio silence for all major units, false radio traffic suggesting operations in different areas, coded references that should mislead Allied intelligence about Japanese objectives. But the deception fails. American naval forces position themselves perfectly to intercept the Japanese attack on Midway. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet, deploys his carriers northeast of Midway, exactly where they need to be to achieve tactical surprise against the Japanese striking force. The Battle of Midway becomes a disaster for the Imperial Navy. 4 aircraft carriers sunk, hundreds of experienced aircrew killed. Japanese naval aviation, the elite force that dominated the Pacific for 6 months, is crippled in a single day. Nagumo, commanding the carrier striking force, watches his flagship Akagi burn and understands that something fundamental has changed in the Pacific War. The Americans didn't stumble into a favorable tactical position. They were positioned deliberately, based on accurate intelligence about Japanese plans, Japanese timing, Japanese force composition. As Nagumo transfers his flag to a destroyer, he receives a radio message from Yamamoto. The message is brief, coded, bitter. The Americans knew everything. Our plans, our routes, our timing. They were waiting for us. How is this possible? Nagumo has no answer. Neither does anyone else in the Japanese command structure. The evidence is overwhelming, undeniable, inexplicable. Allied intelligence services possess capabilities that Japanese cryptographers insist are impossible. June 1942. Captain Jasper Holmes, a British cryptographer attached to the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Center in Hawaii, sits in a secure facility reading Japanese naval messages in real time. The messages detail Japanese fleet movements, operational plans, strategic intentions. Messages that Japanese commanders believe are secure, unbreakable, invisible to enemy intelligence. Holmes has been reading Japanese naval codes since early 1941. He's part of a joint British-American cryptographic effort that has achieved what Japanese experts consider impossible: the systematic penetration of Japanese communications security. The breakthrough came through mathematical analysis of Japanese cipher patterns, combined with captured codebooks, intercepted plaintext messages, and brilliant deductive work by teams of cryptographers working around the clock. The British called it ultra. The Americans called it magic. Together they called it victory. Holmes reads a message from Yamamoto to his fleet commanders, transmitted just hours after the Midway defeat. The message reveals Japanese casualty figures, damage assessments, strategic reassessments, information that allows Allied commanders to understand Japanese capabilities, Japanese intentions, Japanese weaknesses. But Holmes also reads something else in Yamamoto's messages: growing suspicion about communications security, questions about Allied intelligence capabilities, orders for investigation of potential security breaches. The Japanese are beginning to understand that their codes have been compromised. July 1942. Yamamoto orders a complete review of Japanese communications security. Teams of cryptographers examine the Type 97 cipher system, searching for vulnerabilities, testing mathematical assumptions, analyzing encryption procedures. They find nothing. The system remains theoretically unbreakable. But Yamamoto isn't satisfied with theoretical security. He orders practical tests, sending false information through normal communications channels, monitoring Allied responses, searching for evidence that enemies are reading Japanese messages. The tests are inconclusive. Some false information appears to influence Allied operations. Other deceptions have no apparent effect. The pattern suggests partial penetration of Japanese communications, but not systematic compromise. Captain Kuroshima presents the test results to Yamamoto in August. Admiral, the evidence suggests Allied intelligence capabilities exceed our previous estimates, but we cannot determine the extent of communications compromise. Our cipher systems remain mathematically secure, but practical security may be degraded. Yamamoto studies the reports, the test results, the intelligence assessments. The conclusion is disturbing but unavoidable. Japanese communications security, the foundation of naval operations throughout the Pacific, cannot be trusted. Allied intelligence services possess capabilities that threaten Japanese operational security. What do you recommend? Yamamoto asks. Kuroshima has prepared for this question. We must assume that Allied intelligence can read some of our communications. We must modify our operational procedures, our planning processes, our communications protocols. We must fight assuming the enemy knows our intentions. The recommendation is strategically devastating. Japanese naval doctrine depends on coordination between widely dispersed forces, complex operational timing, sophisticated tactical maneuvers, all of which require secure communications. If communications cannot be trusted, Japanese operational capabilities are fundamentally compromised. September 1942, Yamamoto implements new communications security procedures throughout the combined fleet. Critical operational information is transmitted only through hand-delivered messages. Radio communications are limited to routine administrative traffic. Strategic planning is conducted through face-to-face meetings with no written records. But the new procedures create their own problems. Coordination between fleet units becomes difficult. Operational timing becomes imprecise. Tactical flexibility is reduced. The Imperial Navy, designed for rapid, coordinated operations across vast distances, becomes slow, rigid, predictable. Allied intelligence services notice the change immediately. Japanese radio traffic decreases dramatically. Operational intelligence becomes scarce. The flow of information that has provided Allied commanders with decisive tactical advantages begins to dry up. But the damage is already done. 6 months of reading Japanese naval codes has provided Allied intelligence with comprehensive understanding of Japanese capabilities, Japanese procedures, Japanese strategic intentions. Even without continued access to Japanese communications, Allied commanders possess enough information to predict Japanese operations, counter Japanese tactics, exploit Japanese weaknesses. October 1942. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands demonstrates the new reality of Pacific naval warfare. Japanese and American carrier forces engage in a traditional naval battle without the intelligence advantages that characterized earlier engagements. The battle is tactically inconclusive, strategically meaningless, but Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carrier force, notices something significant. American tactical responses are less precise than in previous battles. American positioning is less optimal. American coordination is less effective. As if American commanders are operating with reduced intelligence about Japanese intentions. The observation suggests that Japanese communications security improvements are having some effect, but it also confirms that previous American tactical advantages were based on intelligence, not superior training or equipment. Confirms that Allied forces were reading Japanese naval codes, using that intelligence to achieve tactical surprise, operational coordination, strategic success. November 1942. Yamamoto receives confirmation of his worst fears through an unexpected source. A Japanese submarine captures an American intelligence officer during a raid on Makin Island. Under interrogation, the officer reveals details about Allied intelligence operations that shock Japanese interrogators. The Americans have been reading our naval codes since before Pearl Harbor, the officer admits. They knew about the attack on Hawaii, but couldn't prevent it without revealing their intelligence capabilities. They've been using our own communications against us for almost a year. The interrogation transcripts reach Yamamoto in December. He reads them twice, checks the authentication, verifies the source. The information is credible, detailed, devastating. Allied intelligence services have achieved systematic penetration of Japanese naval communications. The Type 97 cipher system, supposedly unbreakable, has been broken. Yamamoto calls an emergency conference of senior fleet commanders. Present are Nagumo, Kondo, Mikawa, the admirals who've been fighting the Pacific War with compromised communications, degraded security, enemy intelligence advantages they never suspected. Gentlemen, Yamamoto begins, we have been fighting this war with the enemy reading our mail. Our communication security has been compromised since before Pearl Harbor. Allied tactical advantages, operational coordination, strategic success have been based on their ability to read our naval codes. The revelation stuns the assembled commanders. Everything they've attributed to Allied tactical skill, technological superiority, operational luck has been based on intelligence. The enemy has been fighting with perfect knowledge of Japanese intentions, while Japanese forces operated blind. How long have they had this capability? Nagumo asks. Since at least early 1941, possibly longer. They may have been reading our codes before the war began. What does this mean for our operations? Kondo asks. It means we've been fighting at a decisive disadvantage. It means our tactical doctrine, our operational procedures, our strategic planning must be completely revised. The conference continues for hours. The commanders discuss implications, countermeasures, new procedures, but the fundamental reality cannot be changed. Japanese naval operations have been compromised for over a year. Allied intelligence advantages have shaped every major engagement in the Pacific War. December 1942. Yamamoto issues new operational directives throughout the combined fleet. All previous tactical procedures are revised. All operational planning is modified. All strategic assumptions are questioned. The Imperial Navy must learn to fight without the communications security that has been the foundation of naval operations since the Meiji Restoration. But the new procedures cannot undo the damage already done. Allied forces have used their intelligence advantages to achieve decisive victories at Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal. Japanese naval aviation has been decimated. Japanese carrier forces have been crippled. Japanese strategic initiative has been lost. The war in the Pacific has turned decisively against Japan, not because of American industrial superiority or tactical brilliance, but because British and American cryptographers achieved what Japanese experts considered impossible: the systematic penetration of Japanese naval communications. January 1943. Yamamoto writes a private letter to his former teacher, Admiral Togo, the hero of Tsushima. In the letter, he's honest about the strategic situation, the intelligence failures, the communications compromise that has crippled Japanese naval operations. "We have been outfought by an enemy who could read our thoughts," Yamamoto writes. "Every plan we made, every operation we conducted, every tactical decision we implemented was known to the enemy before we executed it. We were fighting blind against an enemy who could see everything." The letter continues, "Our defeat was not caused by inferior training, inadequate equipment, or poor leadership. Our defeat was caused by intelligence failure, communications compromise, cryptographic inadequacy. We lost the war before the first shot was fired because the enemy could read our codes." Yamamoto doesn't send the letter, cannot send it. Admitting the extent of Japanese intelligence failure would be politically devastating, strategically demoralizing, personally humiliating. But he keeps the letter in his personal files, a private acknowledgement of the truth he cannot speak publicly. April 1943. Yamamoto dies when American fighters intercept his transport aircraft over Bougainville. The Americans know his exact flight plan, his timing, his route, because they've intercepted and decoded the Japanese messages arranging his inspection tour. The interception is the final demonstration of Allied intelligence superiority. Even the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet cannot travel safely because his movements are known to the enemy through compromised communications. Admiral Minachi Koga, Yamamoto's successor, inherits a navy that has been fighting with compromised communications for over 2 years. He understands the intelligence situation, the communications problems, the strategic implications, but he also understands that admitting the extent of the compromise would be politically impossible. Instead, Koga implements new security procedures, revises operational doctrine, modifies tactical procedures. He fights the remainder of the Pacific War, assuming that Allied intelligence can read Japanese communications, predict Japanese operations, counter Japanese tactics. The assumption proves correct. Allied forces continue to demonstrate uncanny ability to position themselves advantageously, to coordinate complex operations, to exploit Japanese weaknesses, not because of superior training or equipment, but because British and American cryptographers continue reading Japanese naval codes throughout the war. In post-war interrogations, Japanese admirals were asked when they realized their communications had been compromised. Nagumo, in American custody, answered carefully, "December 1942, he said, when Admiral Yamamoto showed us the interrogation transcripts from the captured American officer. When we learned that the enemy had been reading our codes since before Pearl Harbor. Why didn't you change your cipher systems immediately?" the interrogator asked. "Because our cryptographers insisted the systems were unbreakable. Because admitting communications compromise would have been politically devastating. Because we couldn't believe that Allied cryptographic capabilities exceeded Japanese mathematical expertise." Koga, also in American custody, was more direct. "We knew our communications were compromised, but we couldn't determine the extent of the penetration. We couldn't develop new cipher systems quickly enough to matter. We couldn't fight effectively without radio communications, even compromised communications." "Did you inform Tokyo of the intelligence failure?" the interrogator pressed. "We informed the Naval General Staff that Allied intelligence capabilities exceeded estimates. We didn't specify that our codes had been broken because we couldn't prove it definitively, because admitting such massive intelligence failure would have been career suicide." The truth emerged gradually through post-war investigations, declassified documents, interrogation transcripts. British and American cryptographers had achieved systematic penetration of Japanese naval communications by early 1941. They read Japanese operational plans, strategic assessments, tactical orders throughout the Pacific War. The intelligence advantage was decisive. Allied commanders fought with complete knowledge of Japanese intentions, while Japanese forces operated with compromised security. The outcome of major naval battles was determined not by tactical skill or technological superiority, but by cryptographic success. What Japanese admirals said when British codebreakers cracked their codes was nothing. Said nothing publicly, nothing officially, nothing for the historical record, because admitting communications compromise would have been politically impossible, strategically devastating, personally humiliating. But privately, in secure conversations and classified meetings, Japanese naval commanders gradually understood what had happened, understood that Allied intelligence services had achieved what Japanese cryptographers considered impossible, understood that communication security, the foundation of naval operations, had been compromised from the beginning. They understood, and they said nothing. Because saying something would have required admitting failure, acknowledging enemy superiority, questioning fundamental assumptions about Japanese technological capabilities. Because the truth was politically unacceptable, strategically inconvenient, professionally suicidal. So they blamed tactical errors, equipment failures, operational mistakes, anything except the obvious explanation. Blamed everything except the British and American cryptographers who read Japanese naval codes throughout the war, who provided Allied commanders with decisive intelligence advantages, who helped win the Pacific War through mathematical brilliance rather than military force. The codebreakers who remained invisible, unacknowledged, unrecognized until decades after the war ended. The codebreakers who changed the course of history, while Japanese admirals pretended their communications remained secure, their plans remained secret, their codes remained unbroken.